ZX Spectrum monsters rise from their grave. Just in time for Halloween, this week on Our Sinclair. Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Our Sinclair. It's a couple wacky Americans taking a look at the beloved ZX Spectrum machine from across the pond. I'm your good buddy, your good pal, Amigo Aaron. You'll notice that my wacky pal, the Brent, is not with us this week. As you may have heard, Brent had a baffling string of sort of family crises. It's going to keep him on the sidelines for a couple months. I expect him to be back full-time at the start of the new year. And, of course, hopefully we'll pick up a couple dates with him between now and the end of the year. But for now, I'm going to hold the load down and take on these games myself. And what a great week to be a ZX fan, because I've got two Halloween treats coming this week in the form of the recently re-released Frankenstein rebooted and Dr. Acula. I was approached and graciously allowed to have preview copies of both these reworkings of these games. I'm going to be taking a look at both of them this week. Before I start, I do want to give a shout out to the people that set me up with these. That's our friends over at the Midnight Brew. MidnightBrewGames.com is the place to go if you're interested in picking up this box set with these two games in it. And at the end of the show, I'll get into the specifics on these. But I figured since it's Halloween, what better time to take a look at a couple spooky games, especially spooky games that are having sort of a revival or are coming back from the dead, if you will. So it should be a lot of fun. We're not going to mess around. Let's just get right into the first game. The first game we're going to be looking at this week is Frankenstein rebooted. So you may have noticed right off the gate there, if you are a fan of this game from the past, that yes, that is some in-game and title music in Frankenstein Reloaded. Now, you know, it's only fair that we give all the people their due. So before we talk about Frankenstein Rebooted, I want to talk a minute about Frankenstein, the character, the book. Or as it was also known, the Modern Prometheus, which I like that name. This was famously authored by Mary Shelley, and was published January 1st, 1818. So the story of the birth of this game is actually, I love the story of this. So in the summer of 1816, and this may be known to some people as the year without a summer, because it stayed cold all year due to volcanic eruption. Mary Shelley, Percy, and Claire went to visit Lord Byron in Geneva. Claire was Lord Byron's lover, and when they got to Geneva, the weather conditions were horrible, like cold, wintry weather, and they were forced to basically stay inside. And so, to kill some time, Lord Byron suggested that that he, Mary, Percy, and Byron's physician, John Polidori, have a competition to write the best ghost story. And of course, they didn't just knock this out overnight. This took a little while, and Mary was questioned over and over. What are you writing? What are you writing? She wasn't sure. She wasn't sure, and ultimately, she stumbled upon. She had a dream, I guess, and sort of led her down the path to write the book Frankenstein. The story of a man, Dr. Frankenstein, who uses human body parts to construct a living creature, the monster Frankenstein. And of course, this was it took not too long before this became popular. And in 1931, I would say the Frankenstein's monster was permanently embedded in the conscience of the world with the 1931 film Frankenstein, starring Boris Karloff. Boris Karloff. Still, it's funny. In 1931, you go find me a better Frankenstein. When people think about Frankenstein, they think about the great Boris Karloff and all that makeup. Scary stuff. Even if you go back and watch it now, it's very, very frightening and well done, and was parodied quite greatly in Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein, which is ironically that actually parrots the book quite a bit. So Frankenstein sort of embedded in American and culture, the world's culture, and of course, Frankenstein's had many movies and books written along those lines. And in 1984, a game called Frankenstein, Frank N. Stein, so this is his, N is his middle name, started, and this was published or was produced by Colin Stewart. Colin Stewart wrote the other game we're going to be looking at today, plus he wrote a game called Castle Quest and a game called Lifter on the ZX. And this was originally for the 48K Spectrum, and it's what you would consider a platform game with a lot of puzzle elements to it. So, what do you do in Frankenstein? Well, in Frankenstein, you play the doctor in this. Now, the guy you're actually playing, hilariously, is named Professor Frankenstein. And you are trying to put together his monster and then ultimately trying to avoid his monster's antics. Professor Frankenstein is assembling his creature on half the stages and then sort of trying to take down the creature on the other half. Every other stage is a different theme. So, what is this game? Well, game comes up with a very nice splash screen, and then your job is to go around various platforms and assemble the monster with various body parts that are scattered throughout the area. You'll have a head, two rib cages with arms, and then you've also got two legs you've got to put on there. And then you have to assemble him in order. The neck bone is connected to the backbone, etc., and so forth. And once you have assembled the monster, you then have to go up and hit like a plunger to electrify the monster, just like in the movie. And then presumably, once you do that, you have to scream, "It's alive!" just like in the movie. The original version of this game was a little different than what we're going to be looking at, although I did have a quick glance at it just to see what it was like. So, of course, the first one, it has no music, and had some bugs in it, and had a few differences that they sort of changed out. This one's actually been released and re-released a couple times. So they released this in '84. Then he reworked it in 2011 into Frankenstein Rebooted. And then there's the new version, which is just coming out right now, which is the Frankenstein Rebooted 2024. What's been added to the new version is a lot of bug fixes, and they've added music to the 128K version. So if you play this on the 128K, you get tunes, good tunes. I really enjoyed what they did here with the music. The gameplay, through all these has always been tight, and this one is no exception. Now, when you are attempting to assemble your monster, you're going to come across obstacles, as you would expect. The funny thing about Frankenstein, the professor, is he can't, every other level, he can't jump. In this game, you basically have a left, a right, and an action button. You could really play this with just 3 buttons if you wished. And if you play the keyboard, that's what you do. When you move left and right, but since he has no jump on the odd levels, the only way you can get up and down are via stairs and via springs in the floor and via poles, like firemen's poles. And so as you go around and assemble the creature, you'll have to backtrack and move up and down various platforms And while you're doing that, there are going to be little nasties that are moving back and forth on the platforms. Everything from hypodermic needles to barrels to snakes. There's all sorts of crazy stuff that you're going to see, and you have to avoid these. On top of that, you're also going to see little areas covered in ice. That if you hit those, your guy sort of briefly goes out of control, and you can slide right into enemies. Um, Another thing you have to keep track of is a timer at the top of the screen. I believe in the earliest versions of this timer was just a a gauge that went from left to right, and the closer you came to the right, is the closer you were running out of time. But now it's a straight up clock, and you can see what's going on. They've added an interesting gimmick in this. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen it before. Some games allow you to go across and get pickups for time. This game, you can get extra time, but you've got to pay for it. Embedded in the floor in certain areas are exclamation points, and when you go across them, it shocks the professor. But what it also does is adds time to the timer. So effectively, you're sacrificing a few moments on the platform to get extra time on the clock. Some levels have two of these, some levels have one, some levels don't have any. And as you go through, you're going to run over these. And of course, you can't jump in the game, so you're going to have to run over them at some point. So what you've got to do is sort of run over them when you are able to do that without being ran down by one of the enemies. Once you have fully assembled the creature on the bed, hooked up to the electrodes in the upper right-hand side of the screen, then it's time for you to make your way to the top of the screen. And just underneath the clock is a plunger, and when you run up and hit that plunger, it will awaken the creature, which is well done. It sort of comes down from the top down and on the creature, and just sort of the creature comes to life. It's pretty neat. So once you finish this, then it's time to move on to what I like to call sort of like the Donkey Kong round. So in the second round of this game, the odd levels are you attempting to traverse to the top of a series of basically girders. And when you get to the top, you can hit a plunger that takes out the monster. Now, unlike Donkey Kong, this game provides you with all the ice and springs you need to make it a lot more interesting to get up there, because you have to traverse all these things and avoid enemies while making your way to the top. And at the top of the screen, Frankenstein is throwing cylinders down at you. I don't know if they're barrels or who knows what they are. They look like giant aspirins, if I'm honest. And so, but unlike the odd levels, in this one you can jump. You have a pretty good jump, a slowish jump, but he jumps, and it helps a lot. But of course, you've got creatures crawling above and below the girders, plus the barrels, and so you have to be careful when you jump. And when you get to the top of these levels, you have to be careful to avoid the cylinders coming down, because you're going to be right next to Frankenstein's monster when you get to the very top, and you have to spring your way up. So the way on this to get to the next level above you are they've got strategically placed springs, on the edges of each girder that you can use to get to the top. I should mention they also introduce a sort of a patchy green grass, and when you go through the grass, it slows you down. So it's sort of like the opposite of the ice. Instead of scooting you across, it slows you down. There are also little like teleporters on the screen. The teleporters can sometimes help you and sometimes hose you. You don't have to go in them unless it's just part of the level. You can skip over them. But in this game, I've noticed that they usually, on the levels I was at, most of the time they'll scoot you across a gap or something. But sometimes you actually go backwards. So you got to be careful with those. Once you make it to the top and you hit that top spring, you've got to run across, beat the timer, and hit the plunger. And when you hit the plunger, poor old Frankenstein sinks into the ground and is gone. And you continue to the next level, and you move forward. This game reminded me a little bit. In some ways, it reminds me of playing something like Lode Runner, where you have no jumping ability, but it also reminded me of a little bit of Miner 2049er in some ways, because while the Miner can jump on every level, he's also having to go out and fetch stuff, just like in Lode Runner. The fact that you have to go through the odd levels without being able to jump, it's a real shock at first until you understand the mechanics of the game and how to use the springs. But boy, I found it deeply satisfying to beat levels at this. You've got around 50 levels as you roll up through this, and they get pretty diabolical. It's a cunningly designed game that I really enjoyed. This one, it really caught me off guard, and I had a good time playing it. The creatures are various. I mean, this game gets a lot. I saw a lot of people comparing this to Manic Miner, and Lord knows I've had a dash or two at that game, but I don't really get the comparison, if I'm honest. I mean, it doesn't play like Manic Miner to me in any way. To me, it plays, like I said, it's more like, it sort of reminds me more of something like Lode Runner mixed with a little bit of Miner 24 Hours, but it's a fairly unique game in terms of how you do things. I should mention that the professor, unlike some games, he can't just fall forever. If he falls past like two ledges, he plummets to his death, and then that's the end of him. Once you've completed these levels and you go, it starts over. This is where the real treat is, since you get so many levels to try. I mean, there really are quite a few levels in this thing, and I spent a lot of time playing this week. Much like a Manic Miner, though, once you get past a certain level, you'll sort of kind of memorize that level, and so the next time you're there, it is far easier to get through the levels, in my opinion. So, I looked up some reviews on this one just to see how the original fared, because I really wasn't sure what, I thought it was a real winner. This got a release on the ZX and the Amstrad. I'm just gonna look at the ZX stuff. So again, if you'll recall, this was a 1984 release, and keep in mind these reviews are reviews of the original version. But it got pretty decent scores, mostly 80s and 70s. CBG gave it an 83, Crash gave it an 80, Sinclair User gave it a 70. It's funny, the Amstrad version fared far worse. I don't know, I didn't look at that one, so I don't know if it, what exactly went wrong with that one. It does run a little sluggish. I will say, I think there's it runs better. I think the new rebooted runs at a quicker clip than the old one, from what I can tell from looking at videos and having a play of it. The game, gives you plenty of control options, including remapping, which is nice. So that's always a good thing. This game, in 2011, when the first reboot came out, it got a Retro Gamer Sizzler in Retro Gamer, so that's always a nice thing when you get some accolades in Retro Gamer. So that sort of shows you the time this thing's been around. It's funny that the releases were cunningly timed to bridge the gap between when this game originally came out and where it's at now. So I asked to see if anybody wanted to give me some reviews in the Discord, and I did get a review here from Pajo. He sort of reviewed both these games at once, so I'll go ahead and give you what he's got here. He says, while it's easy to label these as just platform games, there's a puzzling element in figuring out where to go, specifically when to build your creatures. Taking the wrong path can ruin your game, so you have to figure things out before blindly pushing ahead. In true classic Spectrum game fashion, these can be fiendishly difficult in places, but you can improve, so I don't feel there are any cheap deaths. Graphic and sound really hit the Speccy game nostalgia vibe, and I would have played the poop out of these when I was younger. I feel the introduction of a timer doesn't quite work. Often, you're waiting around for enemies to move and end up sitting there doing nothing. The timer also has a lot of a common issue to this game when you don't know when you know the level is lost due to lack of time, but you have to wait until the timer runs out in zero. So there's that. he does mention the pack and says he would give the package of these two games an 8.4 out of 10. So that's a pretty high score. I'll be honest with you, I didn't think the timer was really a bad thing. I mean, you got to have it. You got to have a timer just to keep it interesting. And I will tell you that timer is crucial. It's funny, when you first start playing these levels, you're really up against it. But once you've practiced the route quite a bit, it does take the timer out of it to a certain degree, at least as far as I got. Did I get to level 50? God, no. I was able to get above level 10, which I thought that was pretty good given the week or two I had to play this. I did play these games quite a bit. In fact, I really enjoyed this game a lot, but it was not my favorite of the pack. I will say that. And so let's move on to game number 2. It's Dr. Acula. I just love the theme for Dr. Acula. And I actually, both these games have really good songs and really cute, like, opening pictures. I really enjoy them. I think they did a great job putting those together. So, Dr. Acula, now this is a weird story. I don't have the full scoop, but I'll give you what I've got. Dr. Acula apparently was lost for a long time, but it was unfinished. Again, this is Colin Stewart. This was an unfinished game that he eventually, amazingly, he recovered from cartridges he found in his loft back in 2014 or 2011, if you can believe it. I guess he went through and finished the game. So this is the direct sequel to Frankenstein, Dr. Acula. Again, this is a game that also is just getting released this year. And this one, same creator, Colin Stewart. And this one, the version I'm looking at, is also part of the Midnight Brew pack, which we'll talk about a little bit here at the end of the show. So this one comes with a story. This game had a full page ad in, I believe it was Crash Magazine, and so it sheds some light on what's happening here. If you'll indulge me, I'll read what they've written here. It says, as we know, our old friend Professor Frank N Stein was a keen bone collector, with most of his work done in the graveyard in the grounds of a nearby castle owned by the vampire Dr. Acula. And Dr. Acula wasn't happy about that. One night, Acula captures Frank and locks him away in the castle. But Frank hatched a cunning plan to escape by constructing a coffin, knowing that it would be impossible for Dr. Acula to resist clambering into it, and once Frank had nailed down the lid, he would be trapped for all eternity. Unfortunately, Dr. Acula managed to escape. Bad plan. Dr. Acula managed to escape, destroying the coffin and unleashing his hordes of bats on Professor Frank. The only hope would be to grab a crucifix and send Dr. Acula back into the shadows while trying to rebuild the coffin. Great little intro story to this one. Now, let's talk about, before we get into the game proper, I want to talk about Dr. Acula, the term Dr. Acula, which I've always been amused by. Of course, if you are an Ed Wood fan, this was a movie he had proposed. They absolutely filmed the scene in the Ed Wood movie where he tries to push Dr. Acula on somebody. The place I also remember it from, if you ever watched the American comedy show Scrubs, one of the doctors in there had a script called Dr. Acula. He was always fantasizing about being Dr. Acula. It was always a good time. And I also found out there's a band called Dr. Acula. So there's at least 3 different uses of Dr. Acula. Of course, if you toss out the period in Dr. Acula and smush it together, what do you get? You get Dracula. Dracula was the man, the creature, the entity that was pulled from the mind of Bram Stoker. The original book Dracula, published in 1897. That's crazy. And of course, it's a famous book. If you've ever read it, it's a tough read, but it's because of the way it's written. But it's about a It's about a man taking a business trip to stay at the castle of a nobleman, Count Dracula. But then he discovers that Count Dracula is a vampire, and the Count moves to England and then goes to work on a seaside town. It's up to our good friend Abraham Van Helsing to hunt down and kill Dracula. When I think of people that are well known for basically playing Dracula, there are only two names that come to my mind. I mean, you could come up with more, but there's the original King Dong of Dracula, Bela Lugosi, good old Bela, in the 1931 film adaptation of Dracula. And then, listen, you got to give Christopher Lee his due. He was in a ton of great movies along with Peter Cushing, and in 1958, he played Dracula for the first time. I should mention that the Hammer House people, they also, not only did they do a lot of great Dracula movies, but they did one of the top shelf Frankenstein films. They get a whole series of Frankenstein movies, too. So if you're a Hammer fan, you're in business for the classic monsters. But Christopher Lee was on fire. He had that creepy stare. And Bela Lugosi also had it, and they both were great at their jobs. Bela Lugosi played your more gothic Dracula. Christopher Lee, his Dracula varied a little bit over the years, but they were both great bloodsuckers, and a lot of fun. So I was, after seeing the title of this big Dr. Acula, which is such a goofy title, I was real excited for this one. Again, much like Frankenstein, this one's been reworked for this box set to include in-game audio. If you've got a 128K Speccy, both these will play in the 48K. You don't get the cool sound. This is another one that they really went over the top to bring you something very interesting here. So this game plays around with the formula from the first game, but they've added a lot of interesting stuff. This even reminds me more of Miner 2049 than the first one. And the reason it reminds me more of it is because they've added elevators, among other things, to this game, and little teleporters. So in this game, this is also like Frankenstein. Every odd level, I should say, you are attempting to construct Dr. Acula's coffin to imprison him. And you have to go around the screen to pick up various parts of the coffin in order. Now, this game introduces something I really think is great. It's basically got like an easy and a hard play level. And if you play on the easy level, what it does is it flashes whatever part of the coffin that you need next. Now, this might not sound like a big deal, but it is a big deal if you get confused as to what part you're trying to look for. There's always a point when you're putting these, in the case of Frankenstein, when you put the monster together or putting the coffin together, there's a point where you're like, what goes where? Which piece do I go after? And with the pieces flashing, it's a big help to a first-time player. I played it both ways, and it works great. But I mean, I do like the fact that there's something in there to make the game a little easier to understand for someone that's recently coming into the game. Now, this game not only introduces elevators, but it introduces a few other wacky things. It's funny, he mentions in the full page ad, aside from the fact that you get 50 screens with new features, you get lifts, springs, fireman's poles, water tanks, lightning bolts. So let's talk about the water tanks and this. They really add a different element to this. Again, keeping in mind that you can't jump on the odd levels. So when you come across a creature, sometimes it's real difficult to get around them. You have to kind of wait. There's a lot of waiting in this game, waiting for stuff to happen. But occasionally you'll come across a platform with a water tank in it and a creature moving around it. And what you can do is you can move yourself into that water tank, and you can hit your action button, and your guy will lay down in the water. And then the creature will pass harmlessly over you. It's a real good gimmick. The downside, if you wait there too long, you'll drown and you'll be killed. And I found that out the hard way. And you can't just permanently stay in that position. Once you have went around and assembled this coffin, then you are ready to move on to the next level. Now, much like in the last game, these second levels are more of a Donkey Kong type deal, where you're going from the bottom to the top to try to get to the crucifix. Again, on these levels, you also have the ability to jump. All the stuff you remember from the first game is back, including the swampy, like grassy areas. You also have the ice, but they've added elements since they've got water tanks. For example, they have the ability to have stuff float on the water. So some of the water tanks will extend over the entirety of the platform. And one thing you'll learn is that you can't really jump you have to sort of avoid, you have to time everything and to get out of the pool just in the nick of time to avoid the thing floating in it, plus all the bats that Dr. Acula released from the top of the screen. That's right, Dr. Acula sits at the top of the screen with his bat launcher, and occasionally he'll launch a bat at you, and you have to avoid that as you would, say, the barrels in Donkey Kong. And then when you get to the top of the screen and are able to get the crucifix, that's the end of Dr. Acula, and you go on to one of the odd levels where you can't jump again, and you're trying to reassemble the coffin. I thought Frank N Stein was great, but I think Dr. Acula is it's the sequel, and they did a great job. The puzzles in this are real fun. It's, this is one of those games where you have to be a certain level of genius to put down these levels to make them work. And with the addition of lifts and with the addition of the water tanks and the poles, it gives you more items in your tool chest to make these levels off of. The poles were in the first game, but they used them to better effect here. The water, of course, like I said, it adds an element to the game. Because there's no cute. You can't just charge these levels like a maniac. You have to really ponder your moves and ponder where you're going to go next. And when you play this with the helper off, and you don't know what piece you need next, and you're just sort of trying to remember it, you can go down the wrong path quite easily, and it really costs you on the timer, and that can be the end of you quickly. I found this game a lot easier, in my opinion, than the games it's been related to, like Manic Miner. I'm not saying it's an easy game, but it's far, far less frustrating than like a Jet Set Willy or something. I mean, I thought this game was a lot easier to deal with, and it lays down what you're doing in front of you quite nicely. And so the levels they don't overstay their welcome. And so when you get through one, you really feel like you've accomplished something. And you can move on. I believe you can even pick start levels as you go through eventually from the main menu. This also brings back the area where you touch the electrode to get your timer up. So on some levels, you'll see that as part of it. But again, it's sort of more of the same, but it's like they improved everything, and the flow just seems better. I really enjoyed this one. I think it's the one I preferred of the two. Of course, there were really no reviews of this one because it hasn't been out that while. But Pajo said on Dr. Acula, I spent a few playthroughs wondering how the heck I could get one of those items on the first level, and then I thought to try the action key in the swimming pool and discovered you could lie down to avoid enemies, which is a fantastic mechanic, but completely not obvious to me. And then you can jump on the alternate levels, which I didn't realize until I jumped accidentally and got killed. So maybe a little more instruction could be needed. As a side note, Frankenstein does say activate/jump for the M key, but I assumed it was jump on the springs, and that's what you do in the first level. He also mentions that I prefer Dr. Acula of the two, but I think both are great. I will say, all joking aside about the names and the premises, these are two of the finest, most fun games I've played on Spectrum. I say that given the track record. I've played a lot of games, but some games are just made for you, and these are games that I really can get into. I like the premise. The cheesy premise is great, and I like the color scheme they come up with. The music is good, but gameplay is king in these. And this is the kind of game, like, you could call this a platform puzzler. I guess that's what it is, but it's not too puzzly for me. It's more fun. There's plenty of action, and there are different ways to go about beating the levels. I like the fact that they added that second that the even levels have that Donkey Kong jump gameplay. I like that. It breaks up the game quite nicely, and those aren't just throwaway levels. If you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, look, here's a Donkey Kong clone," Donkey Kong doesn't have ice patches and teleporters and elevators. Well, some elevators, but they've really enhanced. They took the basic gameplay, the Gerda level of Donkey Kong, and added a lot of the elements that make the other levels of this game fun, and to make that a very unique experience, which I quite enjoyed, I have to say. So let's talk about what if you want to pick one of these up. So I talked to Happy over at Happy Coding, a good friend of the show, and got the scoop on some of these. So right off the bat, you can see that if you're not watching at home, the address to go to if you want to order one of these box sets is www.midnightbrewgames.com. Now, if you go to Midnight Brew Games, you'll see that this box set they've really put a lot of interesting stuff in here. So you've got cassette. Of course, you're getting both the games and their cassettes, and they've got their own custom 2024 cassette covers. And if you flip them around, they've redone the 1984 cover for Frankenstein, and Dr. Acula has reversible art as well. You'll get a double-sided Frankenstein art card, and this is quite interesting. They went through and found some artwork that had been done for Crash Magazine by Oliver Frey, and they hired a very talented artist to go through and to fix it, to make it available as a art card. So what you're going to get here is going to be some artwork from Oliver Frey. It's unique. They had it done for this collection. This is something else I thought was interesting. They talked to Colin and had him dig up the original graph paper he used to design all the creatures that are in the game. So you'll get a reproduction of that piece of graph paper, and it's quite interesting to look at. And he's got little notes on them. If you ever wonder how the artists went about trying to make this stuff, this is a little piece of info, which I enjoy. You're also going to get a reproduction flyer, and it all comes in a very nice black box. Now, there'll be a limited run on these. I believe that he told me there had 80 of them left to purchase, because they've had a lot of pre-orders on these, as you can imagine. So I asked Happy, I'm like, okay, with all that said, what's the availability of this? So the price for the box set is £30. They're waiting for the boxes to be delivered for them to ship out the product. But if you order, you are guaranteed to get the digital download of both the games by Halloween. So I think what I had was the final release version of these games. So if you want these box set, you can actually go ahead and get the games to play while you're waiting for your actual boxes to show up. He says they think they might be able to get the boxes in for the UK customers by Halloween, but again, the digital versions will be available for anybody. These will play on the 48K machine. They just won't have the music, and they'll have the beeper sound. And he also mentioned, because we had a lot of people asking about this, if you are interested in these or any games, you can also get the games by going to his Patreon, which is patreon.com/happycodingzx. And if you're one of his Patreon members, you can also get the games that way if you just want the games and not the box set on this one. I think this is quite a good set. I have seen all the stuff they're sending out with it, and it looks nice. If you're a fan of this sort of thing, you get the Oliver Frey, you get the nice box. It's a good deal. I have been told also that I think that eventually after Crash, they're going to also just sell these as digital downloads outright. But right now, they're only available through his Patreon or by buying the box set. I think if you're going to pick something up, this would be a nice gift for somebody, or something to keep for yourself. I mean, the one thing about it is, and I've never been a big box set guy or whatever, but I mean, at least you're going to get 2 killer games out of this set that I think you'll enjoy. So again, if you're interested, go over to midnightbrewgames.com and check these out. And thanks for Happy to send these over. I told Happy, I said, we saw these on the International Computer Club. He showed these off. And I told Boat during the show, I'm like, listen, those games are right up my alley. So I told him, I'm like, listen, send me a couple of these over so I can have a look at them. I told him, I was like, I'm going to call it like I see it on these. But, I mean, they're both great. So he got lucky because they're both awesome games. And they should be fine additions to your ZX collection. I will say, I did play these on my trusty Ingo here from Scoob that Scoob sent me. And they played good. I did have each of them crash on me at one time, but I mean, amongst the hours and hours of gameplay, I don't think that's going to be a problem. So again, that was Frank, N Stein, and Dr. Acula. I think they're winners. I think you'll enjoy them. Let's find out what we're getting into next time around. Bam. So if you listen to our last show, we told everyone that we'd be playing Rampage this time around. We moved Rampage back one slot, so I promise you that the next time we come around on Our Sinclair, we will be playing the beloved Midway Classic Rampage. I've never played this on the Spectrum, but boy, I've played it a ton of times on the arcade, on the N64, and all the iterations and sequels. Me and my son are big fans of Rampage. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the ZX Spectrum can put forward with their rendition. So that's going to be the next time out. I do want to say just a couple things before we close it up. I should be doing a Friday. I do a little show on the side occasionally called a Friday Night Disaster Stream. And my next disaster stream, which should be coming up on the first Friday in November, I believe is going to be a ton of Rusty Pixel games. The guys at Rusty Pixel loaded me down, and I'm going to go through their entire library for the ZX Next. So if you think that's something that might be interesting to you, keep your eyes peeled on this channel for the Friday Night Disaster stream on the ZX Next Rusty Pixel collection. That should be a lot of fun. I want to thank everyone that helped me and participated in Conversations from the Dark Side. We're just closing that up. We finished that up this week with Boat and Rob Flacco here. Thanks to both those guys. We had a lot of fun. And as I'm taping this right before Halloween, I want to wish everyone a happy Halloween. If you want something scary to listen to or to watch, check out Conversations from the Dark Side also on this channel. And again, I want to shout out to the Brent. The Brent's out there. He's working hard. He's taking care of his business, taking care of his family like a proper man should. And he'll be back in action as soon as he's able. I can't wait to get him back in here. I know he was dying to play these, so he was licking his chops. But he'll be back around, hopefully sooner than later. And we'll get him back in the big chair for the next Our Sinclair. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Next week we'll be back with a Coco show on the retro rotation. Should be a lot of fun. I believe we're playing Sinistar next week, so stay tuned for that. And until I see you again, rewind tape and press play. Be seeing you.